Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The morning started like any other Tuesday. Jake Welch stood at the kitchen counter, brewing coffee, while his 7-year-old son, Todd, demolished a bowl of cereal at the table. The kid had his mother's eyes bright green and full of mischief and his father's stubborn jaw. "Dad, can we go to the park after school?" Todd asked, milk dribbling down his chin. "Wipe your face, bud. And maybe. Depends on how much homework you have." Christine, Jake's wife, rushed through the kitchen in her scrubs, stethoscope swinging around her neck. As a pediatrician at County Memorial, she worked brutal hours, but she never complained. "I'm late for rounds. Mom's coming by to pick up Todd's lunch. I forgot to pack it last night." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Chris, you know I don't like your mother being here when I'm not home." "Jake, please. Not this morning." She kissed Todd's head. "Be good for Grandma, sweetie." After she left, Jake helped Todd gather his backpack and walked him to the bus stop. Mrs. Chen from next door waved from her garden. "Morning, Jake. Chemistry lab's keeping you busy." "Always, Mrs. Chen. Always." He taught at Roosevelt High, just 15 minutes from their suburban home. The job paid decently, though not as much as Christine made. That fact that his wife out-earned him had never bothered Jake. But it bothered Gertrude Costa, his mother-in-law, who never missed an opportunity to remind him that her daughter had married down. Gertrude Costa was old money. Her late husband, Victor Costa, had built a pharmaceutical empire before dying suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago. She'd never forgiven Christine for marrying Jake, a middle-class teacher with no prospects. As she'd said at their wedding rehearsal dinner, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jake had learned to bite his tongue over the years. He did it for Christine, who desperately wanted her mother's approval. He did it for Todd, who deserved to know his grandmother. But every interaction with Gertrude felt like a chess match where she'd rigged the board. By 10:47 a.m., Jake was in the middle of explaining ionic bonds to a classroom of disinterested sophomores when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then, again. "Mr. Welch?" A student pointed. "Your phone." He glanced at the screen. 7 missed calls from Lincoln Elementary. His stomach dropped. "Class, continue reading chapter 12. I'll be right back." He stepped into the hallway and called the school back. The secretary's voice was tight, professional. "Mr. Welch, you need to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident with Todd." "What kind of incident? Is he hurt?" "The principal will explain everything. Please come now." Jake ran. 3 police cruisers and 2 ambulances crowded the elementary school's circular driveway. Jake's hands were slick on the steering wheel as he parked haphazardly and sprinted toward the entrance. Parents clustered in worried groups on the lawn. Teachers herded classes away from the building's east wing. Principal Margaret Lawson met him at the door. She was a severe woman in her late 50s, but her face had gone pale. "Mr. Welch. Thank God. Come with me." "Where's Todd? Is he?" "He's alive." The paramedics stabilized him. "But Mr. Welch, we need to talk before you see him." She led him down the empty hallway toward her office. Their footsteps echoed off linoleum floors. "Who prepares Todd's lunch?" "Usually, my wife. Sometimes, me." "Why?" "And this morning?" "My mother-in-law brought it by." "Why are you?" They reached the office. 2 police officers stood inside, a grizzled detective named Morton and a younger officer taking notes. On Principal Lawson's desk sat Todd's lunchbox, the blue one with dinosaurs on it. It was open. "Empty." "Mr. Welch," Detective Morton said, his voice carefully neutral. "Before you see your son, you need to understand what happened." At approximately 11:15, Todd began exhibiting signs of severe distress during lunch. Slurred speech, confusion, extreme drowsiness. His teacher called the school nurse, who immediately called 911. When we arrived, we examined his lunchbox. Morton pulled on latex gloves and reached into an evidence bag. He withdrew a small plastic container, the kind Christine used for fruit. This contained apple slices, but the apple slices were contaminated. Contaminated with what? "We've sent it for lab analysis, but the paramedics identified the substance visually. Crushed pills. A lot of them. The residue is all over the container, and Todd ingested a significant amount." The room tilted. Jake gripped the edge of the desk. What kind of pills? We won't know for certain until the lab results come back, but the paramedics suspect benzodiazepines, possibly Xanax or Valium. Enough to sedate an adult, let alone a 7-year-old boy. That's impossible. My wife's a doctor. We don't even keep pills in the house, except basic painkillers. We lock those up because of Todd. Mr. Welch. Morton's voice hardened. I need you to be completely honest with me. Does your son have any medical conditions that would require sedatives? No. Has he been having behavioral problems? Acting out? No. He's a good kid. Jake's mind raced. You said the apple slices were contaminated. Who prepared them? That's what we need to establish. Who had access to the lunchbox this morning? My mother-in-law, Gertrude Costa. She brought it to the house around 8:30. The officers exchanged glances. The younger one checked his notepad. Gertrude Costa, that's Victor Costa's widow? The pharmaceutical guy? Yes. So, she would have access to prescription medications. Jake's blood went cold. You can't think she wouldn't. Mr. Welch. Right now, we're not thinking anything. We're gathering facts. I need you to give a statement about this morning. Everything that happened. Then, you can see your son. Jake's hands shook as he recounted the morning: Christine leaving early, Gertrude coming by with the lunch, Todd getting on the bus. Normal. Everything had been normal. But his mind kept circling back to Gertrude's face the last time she'd visited 2 weeks ago. Christine had told her that Jake had been promoted to department head at the high school. Gertrude's smile had been sharp as glass. How nice. Such an achievement. The words dripped with contempt. When he finished the statement, Morton said, We'll need to speak with your wife and mother-in-law. For now, go see your son. He's being transported to County Memorial. Jake found Todd in the ambulance, small and pale against the white sheets, an oxygen mask over his face. The paramedic, a woman with kind eyes, touched Jake's shoulder. He's going to be okay. We gave him Flumazanil to reverse the effects. His vitals are stabilizing. Can I ride with him? Of course. In the ambulance. Jake held Todd's small hand and fought the rage building in his chest. Someone had done this. Deliberately. Someone had put pills in his son's lunch and nearly killed him. And if it was Gertrude, she just made the biggest mistake of her life. County Memorial's emergency room was chaos. Christine met them at the door, her face a mask of professional control that cracked the moment she saw Todd. Oh God. Oh my God. He's stable, Jake said. They reversed the drugs. He's going to be okay. What drugs? Jake. What happened? He told her in clipped sentences while nurses transferred Todd to a bed. With each word, Christine's face went from shock to denial to something colder. That's insane. My mother wouldn't. She loves Todd. She'd never. Chris. Jake kept his voice low. The police found crushed pills in his lunch. Pills that your mother had access to. Pills that nearly killed our son. There has to be an explanation. A mistake. Maybe. Maybe what? The pills accidentally fell into the apple slices. Accidentally got crushed up and mixed in? A doctor Jake didn't recognize appeared. Dr. Simmons. According to his badge. Masseuse Welch. We're going to keep Todd overnight for observation. The Flumazanil reversed the immediate effects. But we need to monitor for respiratory depression. He's young, and the dosage he ingested was significant. What was the drug? Christine asked, slipping into professional mode. Preliminary tests indicate alprazolam. Street name Xanax. Approximately 15 milligrams based on blood concentration. Jake watched Christine's face go white. 15 milligrams? That's enough to kill a child his size, yes. If the teacher hadn't caught it when she did, Dr. Simmons didn't finish the sentence. After he left, Christine sank into a chair. My mother has a prescription for Xanax. For anxiety. After my father died, her doctor. She looked up at Jake. But she wouldn't. She loves Todd. She's difficult. I know. But she'd never hurt him. Then how did her pills end up in his lunch? Before Christine could answer, Detective Morton appeared in the doorway with the younger officer. Mrs. Welch? I'm Detective Morton. I need to ask you some questions about this morning. Jake watched his wife go through the same interrogation he had. No. Todd didn't have behavioral issues. No. They didn't keep prescription drugs accessible. Yes. Gertrude had a prescription for alprazolam. Yes, she prepared Todd's lunch this morning. Where's your mother now? Morton asked. At home, I assume. Why? We need to speak with her. We've tried calling, but there's no answer. Christine's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. She dialed, waited. Mom, it's Christine. Call me back immediately. It's about Todd. She hung up. She's not answering. Does she often ignore calls? No, never. She always picks up when I call. Morton nodded to the younger officer, who stepped into the hallway to make a call. Mrs. Welch, I need you to understand the severity of this situation. Your son was poisoned. Based on the evidence, it appears to be deliberate. We're obtaining a warrant to search your mother's residence. A warrant? You can't just... We can, and we will. If you're in contact with her, you need to tell her to cooperate with law enforcement. After the detectives left, Christine turned to Jake. This is insane. My mother has her problems, but she's not a criminal. There has to be an explanation. Jake looked at his wife, brilliant, compassionate Christine, and saw the denial in her eyes. She'd spent her whole life trying to earn Gertrude's love. She couldn't accept that her mother might be a monster. But Jake could, and as he sat beside Todd's hospital bed, watching his son's chest rise and fall, he made a decision. If the police couldn't prove what Gertrude had done, he would. And if Gertrude Costa thought she could hurt his son and walk away, she was about to learn that Jake Welch wasn't the powerless son-in-law she'd always dismissed. He was a chemist. He understood toxins, reactions, and how to create the perfect chain reaction. Gertrude had just started a war. Jake was going to finish it. By 4 p.m., the police had executed their warrant on Gertrude's estate. Jake stood in Todd's hospital room, watching the news on his phone. Aerial footage showed police cars surrounding the Costa mansion, a sprawling Tudor revival in the wealthy Riverside neighborhood, complete with gates and manicured grounds. Christine paced the room. They won't find anything. This is a mistake. Chris. No, Jake. I know my mother. She's controlling and judgmental, but she's not capable of her phone buzzed. She grabbed it. Mom? Where have you been? The police are at your house. Jake couldn't hear Gertrude's response, but he watched Christine's face cycle through confusion, then anger. What do you mean you won't talk to them? Mom, you need to. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it. She hung up on me. Did she say where she was? No. She said she's retaining a lawyer and won't speak to anyone without counsel. Christine's voice broke. Jake, innocent people don't lawyer up immediately. Before Jake could respond, Detective Morton called. Jake put him on speaker. Mr. Welch, Mrs. Welch, I'm at your mother-in-law's residence. We found several items of interest. First, an open bottle of alprazolam in the kitchen, same prescription strength as what was found in your son's lunch. Second, we found traces of crushed pills on the cutting board and knife, consistent with preparation of food. And third, Morton paused. We found a journal. What kind of journal? Christine asked. The kind where Mrs. Costa documented her feelings. About your family, Mrs. Welch. I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation, but I'll need you both to come to the station tomorrow to review some documents. Your mother is officially a person of interest in the poisoning of Todd Welch. After Morton hung up, Christine collapsed into the chair beside Todd's bed. Jake wanted to comfort her, but something stopped him. A memory, sharp and clear. 2 months ago, he'd woken in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Passing Todd's room, he'd seen Gertrude standing in the doorway, just watching the boy sleep. Something about her expression, predatory, calculating, had unsettled Jake. When she'd noticed him, her face had smoothed into a smile. Just checking on my grandson. Jake had chalked it up to paranoia. Gertrude was always cold, but surely she wouldn't hurt Todd. He'd been wrong. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Welch, this is Albert Graham. I'm Mrs. Costa's attorney. Please advise your wife not to speak to law enforcement without counsel present. This is a complicated family matter that's being misunderstood. Jake deleted the text. Then he pulled up his laptop and started researching. If Gertrude thought she could hide behind lawyers, she'd underestimated him. Jake had spent 15 years teaching chemistry, including a unit on toxicology every spring. He knew how substances behaved, how they were detected, and how someone smart could manipulate evidence. But he also knew something else. Every criminal made mistakes. And Jake was going to find Gertrude's. Todd stirred in the bed, his eyes fluttering open. Dad. Hey, bud. Jake took his son's hand. I'm right here. I don't feel good. I know. The doctors are taking care of you. You're going to be fine. Where's Grandma? Jake's jaw clenched. She couldn't make it tonight. But Mom and I are here. As Todd drifted back to sleep, Jake made a silent promise. He'd protect his son. He'd find the truth. And he'd make sure Gertrude Costa paid for what she'd done in a way she'd never see coming. The next morning, Detective Morton's office smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. Jake and Christine sat across from him, while Officer Reynolds, the younger cop from yesterday, stood by the door. Morton slid a photocopy across the desk. This is from Mrs. Costa's journal. The original is evidence, so I can only show you excerpts. But I think you need to see this. Jake read the spidery handwriting. October 3rd, Christine called today, gushing about Todd's science fair project. Jake helped him build a volcano. A volcano. Victor would have hired tutors for proper education, but Christine is content with mediocrity. I tried to suggest alternatives, but she defended him, always defending him. She's blind to what he is, a leech who married her for money. Christine's hands shook. She wrote this. Keep reading. October 17th. Todd called me Grandma Gertie today. I've told Christine repeatedly that I prefer grandmother, but she allows the child to be disrespectful. This is Jake's influence. He's poisoning my grandson against me, filling his head with middle-class values and lack of ambition. If Victor were alive, he'd never allow this. October 29th. I've decided. Christine won't listen. She's too far gone, too manipulated by Jake's schemes. But Todd is young enough to save. If Jake were removed from the picture, if Christine were free to see clearly, she'd realize her mistake. She'd come home, bring Todd, and I could raise him properly. The way Victor would have wanted. Jake felt ice in his veins. She was planning this. It gets worse. Morton flipped pages. November 8th, the day before the incident. November 8th. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Christine mentioned she'd be at the hospital early. Perfect timing. I'll bring Todd's lunch, as any caring grandmother would. I've prepared everything. The pills are crushed, mixed with honey to mask the taste. Not enough to kill, I'm not a monster. Just enough to make him sick. Sick enough that protective services might investigate. Sick enough that Christine might finally see Jake as unfit. A man who can't even keep his son safe. Once doubt is planted, it grows. I've seen it before. Christine made a sound like a wounded animal. Before? What does that mean? Morton's expression darkened. That's what we're investigating. Mrs. Welch, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. How did your father die? Heart attack. 5 years ago. He was 58. Was an autopsy performed? No. The doctor said it was a massive cardiac event. My mother didn't want. Christine stopped. Her face went white. Oh my God. Mrs. Welch. No. No, she couldn't have. My father had high blood pressure. He was stressed from work. The doctor said. Who was his doctor? Jake asked quietly. Dr. Francis. Dr. Theodore Francis. He'd been the family physician for 20 years. Morton made a note. We'll follow up with him. But Mrs. Welch, I have to tell you, we're building a case that your mother deliberately poisoned your son. The journal entries show premeditation. The physical evidence from her kitchen supports it. And now we're looking into whether this was her first attempt at removing obstacles. Christine stood abruptly. I need air. I can't breathe. Jake followed her into the hallway. She leaned against the wall, tears streaming down her face. My mother killed my father. Jake. She killed him. And then she tried to kill Todd. What kind of monster? Hey. Jake pulled her close. We don't know about your father yet. Let the police investigate. But you believe it. He did. Everything clicked into place. Gertrude's obsessive control. Her rage at losing Christine to marriage. Her constant undermining of Jake. She wasn't just difficult. She was dangerous. What matters now is protecting Todd, Jake said, and making sure she never gets near him again. They returned to Morton's office. The detective was on the phone, but he hung up quickly. Mrs. Welch, I need to inform you that we've issued an arrest warrant for your mother on charges of attempted murder, reckless endangerment of a child, and assault with a deadly weapon, the pills. We've also begun proceedings for a restraining order on behalf of your family. Where is she? Jake asked. That's the problem. Mrs. Costa hasn't returned home. Her car is gone. We've put out an APB, but Morton's phone rang. He answered, listened. Then, his face hardened. Understood. Send units immediately. He hung up. Mrs. Costa was just spotted at Lincoln Elementary. She's trying to access the building. Jake's blood turned to ice. The school? Why would she? She's trying to see Todd's classroom. She told the secretary she needed to collect his homework assignments. Christine grabbed Jake's arm. Todd's friends. She knows their names, their parents. Morton was already moving. Let's go. They reached the school in 10 minutes. 2 patrol cars were parked outside, lights flashing. Inside the office, Gertrude Costa stood rigid and furious, facing down Principal Lawson. Jake's mother-in-law was 72, but looked a decade younger. Expensive dermatology, personal trainers, and a ruthless refusal to age. She wore a cream Chanel suit and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like someone's elegant grandmother, not a would-be killer. Christine, darling. Gertrude's voice was honey-sweet. Tell them there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was simply trying to help with Todd's schoolwork. You know how I like to stay involved in his education. Mom. Christine's voice broke. What did you do? I did what was necessary. That boy needs structure, discipline, proper guidance, not the permissive chaos Jake encourages. Gertrude's mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You were supposed to realize the danger. You were supposed to see that Jake can't protect your son, but instead, you're blaming me? Your own mother? You poisoned him. Jake stepped forward. You crushed up pills and put them in his lunch. You could have killed him. Don't be dramatic. I calculated the dosage precisely. Enough to make him sick, not to harm him permanently. I'm not a monster. Jake, I'm a grandmother trying to save her family from your mediocrity. The room went silent. Even Gertrude seemed to realize what she just said. Detective Morton stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. Gertrude Costa, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Gertrude's face twisted with rage as Morton cuffed her. This is ridiculous. Christine, call Albert. Call the lawyers. They can't. You poisoned my son, Christine said quietly. You tried to kill my child because you didn't like my husband. You're not my mother. I don't know what you are. As they led Gertrude away, she hissed over her shoulder. You'll regret this, Christine. Both of you will regret this. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, money, connections. You think you've won? This is just beginning. After she was gone, Jake pulled Christine close. She was shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Jake, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been afraid to say for years. What? My mother didn't just hate you. She hated that I chose you over her. Over the life she wanted for me. Christine looked up at him. When I was in medical school, I dated someone she approved of. Clayton Chambers. Old money, right connections. He proposed, and I said yes. Jake felt his stomach drop. You were engaged? For 2 weeks. Then I met you at that hospital charity event, and I knew Clayton was wrong. That my mother's whole plan was wrong. I broke it off. My mother never forgave me. Christine's eyes filled with tears. She's been trying to destroy our marriage ever since. And now she's tried to destroy our son. Jake absorbed this. Another secret, another layer to Gertrude's obsession. We're going to stop her, he said. Not just the police. Us. We're going to make sure she never hurts anyone again. How? I don't know yet. But I'm a chemist, Chris. I understand how things break down, how reactions cascade. And I'm going to find every single skeleton in your mother's closet and drag them into the light. As they drove back to the hospital, Jake's mind was already working. Gertrude had mentioned calculating dosages. That meant planning, research, possibly practice runs. And if she'd killed Victor Costa, if she'd done this before, there would be evidence. All Jake had to do was find it. Todd was released from the hospital the following afternoon with a clean bill of health. Jake carried him to the car while Christine handled the discharge paperwork. Mrs. Chin from next door had organized a welcome home party, nothing big, just a few neighbors and Todd's best friend from school, Mitchell Carr. But as they pulled into the driveway, Jake noticed something wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar. Stay in the car, he told Christine. He pulled out his phone. ready to call 911, when Detective Morton stepped out onto the porch. "Sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Welch. We had a warrant to search your home." "For what?" "Your mother-in-law made some accusations during her arraignment this morning. Claimed that you were the one who drugged Todd, that you had access to her prescription, that you've been trying to frame her." Morton's expression was apologetic. "We had to check it out. And we didn't find anything. Of course. Your home is clean. But Mr. Welch, I should warn you Mrs. Costa has hired Albert Graham. He's expensive, ruthless, and he's already filed motions to have her released on bail pending trial." Jake felt his jaw clench. She confessed. "We all heard her. She's claiming duress, saying she was confused, upset, that the police coerced her. Graham's arguing that the journal entries are taken out of context, creative writing, not actual plans." Morton shook his head. "I've been doing this 20 years. I've never seen someone flip a narrative so fast. She's dangerous, Mr. Welch. And she's connected." After Morton left, Jake helped Todd settle on the couch while Christine made hot chocolate. The normalcy felt surreal. 3 days ago, their biggest worry had been Todd's science test. Now, they were living in a nightmare. Jake's phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another text. "You're making a mistake. My client is willing to settle this quietly, a misunderstanding between family. Drop the charges, and we can all move forward. Continue this path, and things will get very uncomfortable for your family. Albert Graham, attorney at law." Jake showed Christine the text. Her face went hard. "He's threatening us." "Not directly. He's too smart for that." Jake thought for a moment. "Chris, I need to ask you something. When your father died, who handled the arrangements? The body? The cremation?" "My mother did. She said she wanted to spare me the burden." "Why?" "Because, if she killed him, she wanted to destroy evidence. Cremation eliminates the ability to test for toxins." "Jake, we can't prove that. It's been 5 years. And even if we could, what good does it?" Christine stopped. "You're not thinking about proving it for the police, are you?" "No. I'm thinking about proving it to other people. Your mother's social circle, her business connections, people who matter to her." Jake leaned forward. "Gertrude didn't just try to hurt Todd. She tried to destroy our family. She thinks she's untouchable because she has money and lawyers. But reputation? That's something even Albert Graham can't protect." Over the next week, while Christine focused on Todd's recovery, Jake became obsessed. He spent hours in the public library, combing through old newspaper archives. He reached out to former employees of Costa Pharmaceuticals under the guise of writing a memorial article about Victor Costa. He called Dr. Theodore Francis's office repeatedly until the elderly physician reluctantly agreed to meet. Dr. Francis lived in a modest retirement community despite having treated the wealthy Costa family for decades. He was 83, rail-thin, with rheumy eyes that sharpened when Jake mentioned Victor's death. "I've thought about that night for 5 years," Dr. Francis said, pouring weak tea in his small apartment. "Victor was my patient for 30 years. I knew his heart. Yes, he had hypertension. Yes, he was stressed. But a massive cardiac event, at 58, with his medication regimen, it didn't make sense. Did you suggest an autopsy?" "I did." Gertrude refused. She was insistent, adamant. She said Victor would have hated the indignity. She had him cremated within 48 hours. Dr. Francis stared into his tea. "I should have pushed harder. But the family was grieving, and I had no concrete reason to suspect what I suspected, which was that someone helped Victor's heart stop." Dr. Francis looked up. "Mr. Welch, I read about what happened to your son, and I read about the medications found in Gertrude's home. Did you know that she's been on benzodiazepines since before Victor died?" Christine mentioned anxiety medication. "It wasn't anxiety." Dr. Francis pulled out an old file from a drawer. "I wasn't Gertrude's primary physician, but I consulted on her case 3 times. The first time was 20 years ago, after she was hospitalized for what she claimed was food poisoning. The symptoms were consistent with deliberate ingestion of Victor's heart medication, specifically his beta blockers. The second time was 15 years ago, similar incident. The third time, he handed Jake a medical form, was 6 years ago, 3 months before Victor died." Jake scanned the document. Gertrude had been admitted to a private facility for acute psychological distress following accidental overdose. The treating physician noted possible Munchausen syndrome patient may be deliberately inducing illness to gain attention and sympathy. She was practicing, Jake said slowly, testing dosages on herself. That was my fear. But I had no proof. And the Costa family's lawyers made it very clear that discussing their medical histories could result in legal action. Dr. Francis leaned back. I'm old now, Mr. Welch. Too old to care about lawsuits. If this helps protect your son, use it. Jake left with photocopies of the documents, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Todd. This was a pattern: years of manipulation, testing, and finally, murder. He called Detective Morton. I have evidence that Gertrude may have poisoned her husband. Medical records showing she practiced on herself. A pattern of, Mr. Welch. Stop. Morton's voice was weary. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't use this. The statute of limitations on potential foul play in Victor Costa's death has passed. There's no body to test. And, even if there were, the defense would argue that all of this is speculation connecting dots that aren't legally connected. So, she gets away with it? I didn't say that. The case against her for Todd's poisoning is solid. Her confession, even with her backtracking, combined with the physical evidence and journal entries, will get a conviction. But Mr. Welch, you need to let the legal system work. Jake hung up, frustration burning in his chest. The legal system, the same system that had let Gertrude post the $2 million bail Graham had negotiated. The same system that was now scheduling a trial for 8 months away. 8 months during which Gertrude was free to hire investigators, intimidate witnesses, and spin her narrative. That night, lying in bed beside Christine, Jake made his decision. The legal system would do its job. But Jake was going to do something else. He was going to destroy Gertrude Costa's life the same way she tried to destroy his family. And he was going to use chemistry to do it. The plan came to him in pieces over the following weeks. Jake started with research deep dives into pharmacology, toxicology, and the intersections of chemistry and law. He wasn't planning to harm anyone. He was planning something better. Exposure. Gertrude's power came from 3 sources: her money, her social standing, and her reputation as the grieving widow of a pharmaceutical pioneer. Jake was going to systematically dismantle all 3. First, the money. Costa Pharmaceuticals had been sold after Victor's death. But Gertrude still sat on the board of several medical charities and research foundations, positions that gave her influence and access. Jake reached out to Mitchell Carr's mother, Paulette Little, who happened to be an investigative journalist for the city's major newspaper. Off the record, Jake said, meeting her at a coffee shop downtown. What would you need to write a story about potential fraud in pharmaceutical charity boards? Paulette raised an eyebrow. Evidence. Documentation. Sources willing to go on record. Why? Jake slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents he'd obtained through Freedom of Information requests, financial records, showing that the Gertrude Costa Foundation for Medical Research had awarded several grants to companies that no longer existed. Companies that had been registered to shell corporations with ties back to Gertrude's personal accounts. She's been embezzling. Paulette flipped through the pages. No, wait. This is better. She's been using charity money to fund. What? Private research? Research into sedatives and cardiac medications. Research that wasn't disclosed to the board. Research that technically constitutes misuse of charitable funds. Jake leaned forward. She's been studying poisons for years, Paulette, using donated money meant for cancer research and children's hospitals. And I can prove it. If I write this, she'll sue me into oblivion. Not if I give you a source willing to testify. Jake pulled out his phone and played a recording. Dr. Francis's voice, thin but clear. I consulted on 3 cases where Gertrude Costa appeared to deliberately ingest medications. I now believe she was conducting experiments on herself. Paulette's eyes widened. Holy shit. The article goes live when I say. Not before. I need to time this right. Second, the social standing. Gertrude's power in their affluent suburb came from her involvement in everything: the country club, the arts foundation, the hospital board. Jake started planting seeds. He befriended other board members, attending charity events he normally avoided. He was charming, sympathetic, the devoted father, trying to rebuild after his son's unfortunate incident. He mentioned, casually, that Gertrude had been struggling with cognitive issues lately, that the family was concerned about her making irrational decisions. He showed people the text from Albert Graham, the barely veiled threats, and framed them as evidence of Gertrude's deteriorating judgment. "We don't want to embarrass her publicly," Jake told Marjorie Harrell, head of the Arts Foundation, over cocktails. "But we're worried. This situation with Todd, it's clear she's not herself." The doctors mentioned early onset dementia might explain her confusion. Marjorie's face softened with sympathy. "That's terrible. The poor woman. Perhaps it would be best if she stepped back from her commitments until she's better." Within 3 weeks, Gertrude was quietly removed from 2 boards. The official reason was health concerns. The unofficial whispers were worse. She tried to poison her own grandson. Can you imagine? Third, and most importantly, the reputation. This required chemistry. Jake spent 2 weeks in his garage laboratory, the same space where he helped Todd with science projects, carefully recreating Gertrude's crime. He documented everything. The process of crushing pills, the way they'd mix with food, the precise measurements needed to sicken but not kill. He filmed it all, step by step, with clinical narration. Then he did something clever. He reached out to Dr. Cecil Donaldson, a famous toxicologist who'd written several popular books about poisoners throughout history. Jake presented himself as a fellow academic researching modern poisoning methods for educational purposes. "I'd like your expert analysis of this case," Jake said, showing Donaldson his recreations, "for potential use in criminal justice education." Donaldson was fascinated. He spent hours analyzing Jake's work, recording detailed commentary about the sophistication of the method, the calculation required, the clear evidence of premeditation. He had no idea he was essentially providing expert testimony against Gertrude testimony that Jake quietly recorded and saved. But the final piece, the piece that would destroy Gertrude, completely came from an unexpected source. Christine came home one afternoon with a box of her mother's belongings. She had the movers drop these off. Things she claimed were mine from childhood. "I think she's trying to manipulate me into visiting her." Inside the box, buried under old photos and yearbooks, Jake found it. Victor Costa's medical records, not copies. Originals. The ones Gertrude should have destroyed years ago. And there, in Victor's file from his last physical exam 2 weeks before his death, was a note from his cardiologist. "Patient's heart is in excellent condition. EKG normal. No signs of cardiovascular stress. Cleared for full activity." Discussed patient's concern about his wife's recent behavior, specifically, her obsessive interest in his medication schedule. Patient mentioned she's been asking detailed questions about his prescriptions, recommended marital counseling. Victor had known. 2 weeks before he died, he'd known something was wrong. Jake sat in his garage, holding the records, and felt everything click into place. Gertrude hadn't just killed her husband on impulse. She planned it because he'd figured her out. He'd been about to expose her, probably divorce her, possibly cut her off from the pharmaceutical fortune. So, she'd stopped his heart. Jake made copies of everything. He encrypted them, stored them in multiple locations. And then he prepared for the final phase. Gertrude's trial was set to begin in 2 weeks. Albert Graham had convinced the judge to allow her to remain on house arrest rather than jail, provided she wore an ankle monitor and stayed within county limits. She'd been quiet lately, too quiet. No more threatening texts, no more legal maneuvering. That should have been Jake's first warning. He was leaving Roosevelt High one evening when a black SUV pulled up beside him in the parking lot. The window rolled down, revealing Albert Graham himself. The lawyer was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the predatory confidence of someone who'd never lost a case. "Mr. Welch, I hoped we could talk. I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Graham's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My client is willing to make a deal. She'll plead to reckless endangerment, serve 2 years minimum security, pay restitution, and maintain permanent distance from your family. In exchange, you convince your wife to not testify against her mother." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'll destroy you in court. I'll put every aspect of your life under a microscope. Your finances, your teaching record, your past relationships. I'll paint you as an opportunistic gold digger who married Christine for her money and has been psychologically abusing Gertrude for years, driving her to this desperate act. Graham's voice was matter-of-fact. I'll win, Mr. Welch. Not because my client is innocent, but because I'm better at this than you are. Jake felt rage building, but kept his voice steady. Your client tried to murder my son. My client made a terrible mistake while suffering from grief-induced psychological distress. The jury will sympathize with a 72-year-old widow who lost her mind trying to protect her grandson from what she perceived as danger. Graham handed Jake a card. You have 48 hours to consider the offer. After that, we go to war. And Mr. Welch? I always win. Jake watched the SUV drive away, then immediately called Detective Morton. He's bluffing, Morton said. The evidence against Gertrude is overwhelming. But what if he's not? What if he really can spin this? Then we make sure he can't. Morton paused. Mr. Welch, have you found anything else? Anything that might strengthen the case? Jake thought about the documents in his garage. Victor's medical records, Dr. Francis's testimony, the evidence of Gertrude's years of manipulation. Yeah, he said slowly. I have. But I need your help getting it into the trial. That night, Jake, Christine, and Detective Morton sat around the Welch's kitchen table, building their counterattack. Morton reviewed the medical records. This is good. This shows motive for Victor's death. But without a body. We don't need to prove she killed Victor, Jake interrupted. We just need to prove she's capable of it. That Todd wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Christine looked pale, but determined. What about the charity fraud? The research she was funding? That's trickier. It's technically legal. She was funding legitimate research, just research into topics she had personal interest in. Unethical, yes. Criminal. Harder to prove. Morton drummed his fingers on the table. But combined with everything else, it builds a picture of someone obsessed with control, manipulation, and using medicine as a weapon. They worked until 2 a.m., building a timeline that spanned 15 years. Gertrude's hospitalizations, Victor's death, the charity fraud, the journal entries, Todd's poisoning. Each piece alone was concerning. Together, they painted a portrait of a methodical, dangerous predator. The next morning, Jake called Paulette Little. Run the story. The article hit the newspaper's website at noon. The headline, Pharmaceutical Widow Used Charity Funds to Research Poisons. Exclusive investigation into Gertrude Costa's decades of deception. Paulette had done her job perfectly. The article detailed everything: the misused charity funds, Dr. Francis's testimony about Gertrude's self-poisoning experiments, the suspicious circumstances of Victor's death. She'd interviewed 3 former Costa pharmaceutical employees who described Gertrude's unhealthy obsession with drug interactions. She'd obtained statements from board members expressing shock at the revelations. By 3 p.m., the story had gone viral. Local news crews camped outside Gertrude's mansion. By 5 p.m., the charity boards had issued statements demanding investigations. By 7 p.m., Albert Graham had called a press conference denying everything. But the damage was done. Social media erupted. Number Justice for Todd started trending. Crime bloggers picked up the story. Within 24 hours, the narrative had shifted from troubled grandmother makes mistake to calculating poisoner caught at last. Jake watched it all unfold from his living room. Todd curled up beside him watching cartoons, blissfully unaware that his father had just detonated a bomb under his grandmother's defense. Christine sat on his other side. This is really happening. She's going to be destroyed. She destroyed herself, Jake said. I just made sure everyone could see it. His phone buzzed. Albert Graham. You've made a terrible mistake, Mr. Welch. See you in court. Jake smiled. Let him come. Jake had been teaching chemistry for 15 years. He knew that some reactions, once started, couldn't be stopped. And Gertrude Costa's downfall was now a chain reaction spiraling out of control. The trial began on a Monday morning in late December. The courthouse was packed: journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and members of Gertrude's former social circle, all hungry to watch the spectacle. Jake and Christine sat in the front row, Todd safely at home with Mrs. Chen. Gertrude entered in a dove-gray suit, her silver hair perfect, her face a mask of wounded dignity. She looked like every juror's elegant grandmother. Albert Graham had coached her well, But then the prosecution began, and Jake watched Graham's confidence slowly erode. First, Detective Morton's testimony, methodically laying out the evidence. The pills, the journal, the confession. Then Dr. Simmons, the emergency room doctor, explaining how close Todd had come to dying. Then Principal Lawson, describing Todd's collapse at school. Graham tried to poke holes. Isn't it possible the pills were accidentally contaminated? That Mrs. Costa didn't realize. Pills don't accidentally crush themselves and mix evenly into food, Morton said flatly. This was deliberate. Then came Christine's testimony. Jake watched his wife take the stand, saw her hands shake as she swore to tell the truth. But her voice was steady as she described her mother's obsession with control, her disapproval of Jake, her increasingly erratic behavior. "Did you love your mother?" the prosecutor asked. "I did," Christine said quietly. "I spent my whole life trying to earn her love back. But now I realize she never loved me. She loved control. And when she couldn't control me anymore, she tried to destroy what I loved most. My family." During cross-examination, Graham tried to paint Christine as a manipulated wife, brainwashed by Jake. "Isn't it true your husband has been trying to isolate you from your mother for years?" "No. What's true is that my mother tried to poison my 7-year-old son because she didn't like my choice of husband." Christine's voice hardened. "And I will never forgive her for that." On day 3, Jake took the stand. He prepared for this practice, staying calm, keeping his answers short and factual. But nothing prepared him for the hatred in Gertrude's eyes as he testified about finding Todd in the ambulance, about the terror of thinking his son might die. Graham's cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Welch, isn't it true you resented Mrs. Costa's wealth? That you felt inferior to her late husband?" "No." "Isn't it true that you had access to Mrs. Costa's home, including her medications?" "She gave me a key years ago for emergencies. I never used it, but you could have. You teach chemistry, Mr. Welch. You understand how to manipulate substances. Isn't it possible you're the one who drugged your son to frame a woman who never accepted you?" The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Jake forced himself to stay calm. "I would never harm my son. And the evidence proves it wasn't me. Gertrude's journal, her confession, her prescription that was used. You can try to twist this, Mr. Graham, but the truth doesn't change." On day 4, the prosecution played their trump card. Dr. Francis, the elderly physician, took the stand and systematically demolished Gertrude's defense. He testified about her pattern of self-poisoning, her experiments with medications, her obsessive questions about drug interactions. He produced the medical records from her hospitalizations. And then, carefully, he introduced Victor Costa's final medical exam. 2 weeks before his death, Victor Costa's heart was in perfect condition. There was no medical reason for him to suffer a fatal cardiac event. Dr. Francis looked directly at Gertrude, but there was a non-medical reason. His wife had been studying his medications, learning what combinations could stop a heart without leaving obvious traces. Graham objected furiously. "This is speculation. There's no proof. It's established pattern evidence." "Your Honor," the prosecutor countered, "Dr. Francis is testifying to Mrs. Costa's history of poisoning behavior, which directly supports the current charges." The judge allowed it. By the time the prosecution rested, Jake could see the jury's faces. They weren't looking at Gertrude with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with horror. Graham's defense was aggressive, but hollow. He called character witnesses who described Gertrude as a devoted grandmother and pillar of the community. He brought in a psychiatrist who suggested Gertrude had been suffering from acute stress disorder following her husband's death. But when Gertrude took the stand, everything fell apart. She'd insisted on testifying despite Graham's advice. And at first, she was perfect, crying softly, apologizing, claiming she'd been confused and not thinking clearly. She spoke about losing Victor, about fearing she'd lose Christine and Todd too, about making a terrible mistake. Then the prosecutor began cross-examination. "Mrs. Costa, you wrote in your journal that Todd was young enough to save. Save from what?" From a difficult situation. I didn't want him hurt by the tension in the family." "The tension you created?" "I know. The tension that exists when a mother watches her daughter make mistakes." "Is marrying Mr. Welch a mistake?" "Christine could have done better. She was meant for greatness, not middle-class mediocrity." The mask was slipping. The prosecutor pressed harder. "So, you decided to make Todd sick to prove Jake was unfit?" "I decided to help my daughter see clearly. By poisoning her son? I calculated the dosage. He was never in real danger. I'm not a monster." Gertrude's voice rose. "I did what was necessary to protect my family from that man." The courtroom went silent. Graham's face went white. The prosecutor spoke quietly. "Mrs. Costa, did you kill your husband?" Objection. Graham was on his feet, but Gertrude was beyond controlling. "Victor was weak. He was going to leave me. Leave me. After everything I'd done for him, building his company, managing his career. He thought he could just walk away. He thought." She stopped, finally realizing what she'd said. "No further questions," the prosecutor said. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's voice was clear and firm. Guilty on all counts. Gertrude Costa was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder, plus additional time for reckless endangerment and assault. The judge denied bail pending appeal and ordered her remanded to custody immediately. As the bailiffs led her away, Gertrude turned to look at Jake one last time. Her face was twisted with rage. "You destroyed my life." "No," Jake said quietly. "You did that yourself. I just made sure everyone knew about it." 6 months later, Jake stood in his garage, packing away the last of his research materials. The trial was over. Gertrude was in prison. The police had reopened the investigation into Victor Costa's death, though proving it after 5 years would be difficult. But Jake had done what he set out to do. He protected his son. He'd exposed Gertrude's crimes. And he'd proven that sometimes the best revenge isn't violence or cruelty, it's simply making sure the truth comes to light. Christine appeared in the garage doorway. The real estate agent called. "We have an offer on the house." They were moving. Too many bad memories in this place. They'd found a smaller home across town, closer to a better school for Todd, with a big backyard and no ghosts. "You okay?" Jake asked. "I don't know. Some days I'm angry at her. Some days I just feel sad. She was my mother, Jake, and now she's..." Christine's voice broke. "Now she's nothing." Jake pulled her close. "She made her choices. You made yours. You chose our family. That's what matters." Inside, Todd was building a volcano for his science project. A real one this time, not just the garage experiments Jake did for research. The kid was happy, healthy, and had no idea how close he'd come to losing everything. That night, as Jake tucked Todd into bed, his son looked up at him with serious eyes. "Dad, is Grandma ever coming back?" "No, Bud. She's not. Good. She was scary sometimes." After Todd fell asleep, Jake returned to the garage one last time. He pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted file, the complete dossier he'd built on Gertrude. Every piece of evidence, every crime, every manipulation. He'd given most of it to the police and prosecutors, but he'd kept copies, just in case. Detective Morton had warned him that Gertrude might appeal, that Albert Graham might find some legal loophole. But Jake wasn't worried. He'd spent months studying his enemy, learning her patterns, understanding how she thought, and he'd learned the most important lesson. Gertrude's greatest weapon had always been her reputation. Her image as the elegant widow, the devoted grandmother, the pillar of society. Jake had destroyed that weapon, and without it, she was just a bitter old woman in a prison cell, cut off from the money and power that had protected her for so long. His phone buzzed. A message from Paulette Little. "Following up on our conversation. The documentary crew wants to interview you about your role in exposing Gertrude. Interested?" Jake smiled. More exposure meant less chance of Gertrude ever manipulating her way out of prison. It meant other victims, if there were any, might come forward. It meant the truth would spread further than Gertrude could ever contain. He typed back, "Yes. Let's talk." 3 months later, the documentary aired. The Costa Poisonings. How a chemistry teacher exposed his mother-in-law's deadly secrets. It featured interviews with Jake, Christine, Dr. Francis, and Detective Morton. It showed Jake's recreations of the poisoning method. It detailed Gertrude's decades of manipulation. The documentary won awards. It sparked conversations about narcissistic family abuse, about the vulnerability of children, about how people with money and power can hide their crimes for years. And it ensured that Gertrude Costa would never be free, even If she someday got out of prison, her reputation was destroyed forever. Everyone would know what she'd done. Jake watched the finale from his new living room, Christine beside him, Todd asleep upstairs in his new bedroom. The documentary ended with a shot of Jake in his classroom, teaching a chemistry lesson about chain reactions. Some reactions, once started, can't be stopped. Jake's voice said over the footage. They build on themselves, each step triggering the next, until the entire system transforms. That's what happened here. Gertrude thought she could control the reaction, but she couldn't, because the truth, once set in motion, will always find its way to light. The screen faded to black. Christine squeezed Jake's hand. You did it. You really did it. We did it, Jake corrected. You, me, Morton, Dr. Francis. Everyone who refused to let her get away with it. What now? Jake thought about that. The past year had been consumed by Gertrude stopping her, exposing her, making sure she paid. But now it was over. Really, truly over. Now, Jake smiled. Now we live. We raise our son. We be happy. That's the best revenge, living well while she rots in a cell. A year after the trial, Jake received a letter forwarded from the courthouse. It was from Gertrude. He almost threw it away without reading. But curiosity won. The letter was short. Jake, you won. I hope you're satisfied. You took everything from me, my freedom, my reputation, my daughter, my grandson. You destroyed my life. But I want you to know something. I don't regret what I did. I regret that I failed. If I could do it again, I'd plan better. I'd be more careful. I'd make sure you couldn't stop me. You think you're a hero. You're not. You're a man who got lucky. Nothing more. Rot in hell, Gertrude. Jake read the letter twice, then burned it in the fireplace. He felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, no fear. Gertrude was irrelevant now, just a bitter woman clinging to her delusions in a prison cell. He went upstairs to check on Todd. The boy was asleep, clutching his favorite dinosaur, safe and healthy and loved. Jake had been a chemistry teacher for 15 years. He taught thousands of students about reactions, about cause and effect, about how substances interact and transform. But the most important reaction he'd ever catalyzed wasn't in a lab. It was exposing evil, protecting his family, and proving that sometimes ordinary people can win against monsters. And as he closed Todd's bedroom door and returned to his wife, Jake finally felt the weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. They'd won. And Gertrude Costa would spend the rest of her life knowing that she'd been beaten by the mediocre son-in-law she'd always dismissed. That, Jake thought, was justice. 5 years later, Jake stood in a university auditorium, addressing a room full of criminology students. After the documentary and the publicity surrounding the case, he'd been invited to speak about forensic chemistry and how ordinary citizens can work within the legal system to expose crimes. The key, he told the students, is understanding that evidence tells a story. My mother-in-law thought she could hide her crimes behind money and lawyers. But chemistry doesn't lie. Toxicology doesn't lie. And once you understand how substances behave, how they're detected, how they leave traces, you can build an unshakable case. A student raised her hand. But Mr. Welch, you weren't law enforcement. How did you know the evidence would be accepted in court? I didn't. But I knew that truth has weight. If you document everything, if you work with police instead of against them, if you build your case piece by piece, truth wins. Jake smiled. And in this case, truth meant a mother-in-law who thought she was untouchable, finally facing justice. After the lecture, a young woman approached him. Mr. Welch, I'm Allison Bernard. I'm writing a book about family crime, and I'd love to include your case. Would you be willing to? No interviews, Jake said gently. I've told the story enough times. Now I just want to live my life. He drove home to the house they'd bought 5 years ago. Todd was 12 now, interested in chemistry like his dad, talking about becoming a forensic scientist. Christine had opened her own pediatric practice. They were happy. That evening, Christine showed him a letter. This came today, from the parole board. Jake's stomach tightened. Already? She's only served 5 years. She's up for early release. Good behavior, apparently. There's a hearing next month. Christine looked at him. They want us to testify about whether we support parole. Jake thought about Gertrude's letter. I don't regret what I did. I regret that I failed. She hasn't changed, he said. She's just learned to hide it better. So, we testify against her release? We do. And we make sure the parole board understands exactly who they're dealing with. At the parole hearing, Jake and Christine presented their case. They brought Dr. Francis's testimony, the journal entries, the letters Gertrude had sent from prison letters that showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. The parole board listened. They deliberated. Gertrude's parole was denied. She wouldn't be eligible for another hearing for 5 years. As Jake and Christine left the courthouse, Christine said, "She'll never truly be free, will she? Even if they eventually release her, everyone knows what she did." "That's the point," Jake said. "Prison is part of her punishment. But the real punishment is living with what she's lost: her reputation, her family, her power. Everything she valued is gone." They drove home as the sun set over the city. Todd was waiting for them, excited to show Jake his latest chemistry experiment. Christine made dinner. They ate together, laughed together, lived together. And somewhere in a state penitentiary, Gertrude Costa sat in a cell, alone with her bitterness and rage, while the family she tried to destroy thrived without her. Justice, Jake had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection. It was about making sure the people you love stay safe. And it was about proving that evil, no matter how well-dressed or well-funded, eventually faces consequences. He'd protected his son. He'd exposed a predator. And he'd won. That was enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you